They thought your silence meant defeat. They thought your distance meant surrender. But what they never realized was that you weren't retreating, you were resetting. In a world addicted to reaction, your stillness became a weapon. Every unread message, every delayed reply, every quiet hour they didn't hear from you, it wasn't weakness. It was precision. Because silence has gravity. It pulls the truth out of people. It reveals who's real and who only stayed because you kept reaching out first. You see, the one who chases noise ends up lost in it. But the one who can hold silence owns the tempo of every interaction. That's where power begins. Not in the argument, not in the explanation, but in the space you refuse to fill. This isn't about revenge. It's about emotional intelligence, about learning to hold your energy like a sword. The moment you stopped responding, something shifted. You stopped orbiting them, and they started orbiting you. Welcome to the turning point where silence is no longer a void, but a message they can't escape. This is how the game flips. Every connection you've ever had, friend, lover, colleague, runs on an invisible rhythm. Someone leads, someone follows, someone sets the tempo, someone reacts. And here's the truth, most never see the one who reacts first, loses control. Life, at its core, is psychological chess. Most people think they're connecting, but they're actually negotiating for emotional power. The one who texts first explains more, apologizes faster, or fills every silence, is the one revealing their position on the board. And once your rhythm is predictable, your power becomes visible and exploitable. We live in an age of noise, constant pings, dopamine loops, and emotional triggers disguised as connection. Everyone wants to be heard, but few know how to listen. Everyone wants attention, but no one learns detachment. And so they chase validation, reassurance, reply times, little signs that they still matter. But every time you react instantly, you surrender a little more of your psychological ground. The Stoics saw this centuries before smartphones existed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In other words, the moment you let another person dictate your reactions, you hand them your piece. You become a piece on their board, moved at their convenience. Think of it like rhythm in music. The one who controls the tempo controls the entire song. If you rush, they dance you into their tune. But when you pause, when you let silence stretch, you make them adjust to your beat. That pause unsettles them. It interrupts their pattern. And that's when the invisible game starts to flip. People who once felt powerful because you always responded now feel uneasy in your calm. They check their phone more often. They replay your last words. They start to wonder, did I lose them? Did I go too far? And here's the paradox. You haven't done anything, you simply stopped reacting. But your restraint created a disturbance in their psyche. Silence forces reflection. Reflection awakens insecurity. This isn't manipulation. It's psychological discipline. You're not withdrawing to punish. You're withdrawing to observe. To let clarity replace confusion, to see who reaches out when you no longer feed the connection. That's the invisible game most people never learn. They mistake emotional noise for intimacy. They think chasing equals caring. But true emotional intelligence lies in non-reaction, in the ability to hold space without collapsing into it. When you stop being predictable, you stop being controllable. When you stop chasing, they start questioning. When you stop explaining, they start remembering. This is the foundation of Stoic strength in modern life, to master your inner rhythm while the world loses its own. The moment you stop dancing to their beat, you become the metronome of the interaction, and quietly, without drama, the balance of power begins to shift. They never gave you love, they gave you crumbs. Little fragments of attention, affection, or words that almost felt like care. Enough to keep you waiting, never enough to feel full. That's the trap. You think you're in a connection, but you're in a pattern. They don't need to give you consistency, just unpredictability, because inconsistency is the perfect hook. When they show up, your mind releases dopamine. When they disappear, anxiety floods in, and before you realize it, you're no longer connected to them, you're addicted to the cycle. Stoicism calls this slavery of the soul, when your peace depends on another person's rhythm. It's not love, it's conditioning. And the one who gives the crumbs knows exactly what they're doing. They're testing your boundaries, not your heart. They want to see how much they can take without losing your attention. They'll send you half messages, half apologies, half effort, and watch what you do with it. If you respond with enthusiasm, they've learned something crucial. You don't need nourishment. You'll survive on scraps. That realization gives them quiet power, because once someone knows you'll stay, no matter how little they give, they never have to give more. But Stoicism teaches something radically different to need. Nothing is to attract everything. When you detach from the illusion of connection, when you stop begging for the emotional breadcrumbs, the game flips. The one who used to starve you begins to feel hunger for the first time. Why? Because your silence breaks their pattern. You've stopped feeding their sense of control. You no longer react to the crumbs they throw your way. And when a manipulator's rhythm is interrupted, they lose their footing. They start to crave the validation you once gave them. The illusion collapses. They realize the attention they once took for granted was the very energy that kept them relevant. Without your responses, your explanations, your presence, their significance fades. The same silence they once used to punish you now punishes them. This is the quiet reversal. Stoicism was built for you stop defining connection by proximity. You define it by peace. You stop chasing warmth that burns you and start protecting the calm that heals you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up, if thou wilt ever dig." He meant that everything you crave, externally validation, affection, closure already exists within your ability to govern yourself. When you stop needing, you stop bleeding. When you stop chasing, you start choosing. The person who gave you crumbs will never admit it, but your silence is the first meal they've had to swallow alone. They replay your absence, hoping for the old rhythm to return. But it doesn't, because now You've outgrown the table that fed your starvation. And that is when obsession begins, not out of love, but out of loss. Not because they miss you, but because they can't control you. Every dynamic has a rhythm, a hidden beat that dictates who leads and who follows. One person initiates. The other responds. One gives attention. The other receives it. And without realizing it, you become trapped in someone else's tempo. They text. You reply. They withdraw. You chase. They go silent. And you fill the silence with explanations and apologies they never asked for. That's not communication, that's control. Most people think power is about speaking louder, explaining more, showing how much you care. But true psychological power begins when you stop dancing to someone else's music, when you stop reacting on impulse and start holding your position even when it burns. Because silence isn't passive, it's precision. When you stop feeding their ego, you shatter the rhythm they built to keep you predictable. You create a void, and in that void, they hear themselves for the first time. They start to wonder, why aren't they reacting? Why haven't they texted? Did I lose control? This confusion is the beginning of the psychological shift. The one who used to lead now hesitates. The one who used to observe you becomes unreadable. And in that unreadability, you become powerful. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." The moment you master your reaction, you become free. Not because you win the argument, but because you no longer need one. You're no longer in the noise. You've become the silence that commands it. Most people crumble here. The silence feels unbearable, like losing oxygen. They confuse stillness with punishment, absence with rejection. So they break formation, send the message, reopen the loop, and hand the power back. But the Stoic understands that discomfort is the test. When you resist the urge to reach out, you teach your nervous system peace. When you hold the silence long enough, it transforms from emptiness to clarity. And when clarity comes, something shifts permanently. You realize that silence isn't about controlling them, it's about no longer needing to. The less you react, the clearer you see. The clearer you see, the stronger your posture becomes. And once your posture changes, everything else adjusts around it. Their tone, their behavior, their perception of you. This is how psychological authority is built, not through domination, but through discipline. Your pause becomes your power. Your restraint becomes your statement. When you no longer fill every gap with words or explanations, you teach others to meet you in stillness or lose access to your energy altogether. And when you reach that point, something profound happens. They stop playing the game, because the game no longer works on you. That's the moment the dynamic flips quietly, elegantly, irreversibly. The silence they once dismissed becomes the language they can't stop thinking about. They start hearing your absence louder than your presence ever was. That's the art of breaking the rhythm. It's not about punishing them, it's about reclaiming yourself. Because once you own your response, you own the entire game. Silence doesn't just stop the conversation, it starts a reflection. When you pull back your energy, what used to be a comfort for them turns into a mirror. At first, they dismiss it. They tell themselves, "You're just busy, distracted, or playing games." But silence has a way of stretching the truth until it becomes impossible to ignore. The longer you say nothing, the louder their thoughts become. And eventually, what they see in that mirror isn't you, it's themselves. All the control they thought they had begins to fracture, because what they were really controlling wasn't you. It was their sense of dominance, their ego's illusion of being desired on command. Your silence interrupts that fantasy. It removes the feedback loop that fed their self-importance. Suddenly, the validation they once took for granted disappears. The attention that propped up their confidence vanishes. The certainty they built their superiority on starts to crack. And in that crack, reality leaks in. Now they're the ones refreshing the chat window. They're the ones replaying old conversations. They're the ones remembering small details they once ignored. They start to feel what you once felt: uncertainty, anxiety, longing. That's the mirror effect, the silent reversal of emotional gravity. When you were the one chasing, your thoughts orbited them. Now that you've gone still, their mind starts to orbit you. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When your thoughts were filled with them, your world became unstable. But now, it's their thoughts that can't escape the gravity of your stillness. You haven't posted, you haven't texted, you haven't explained, and yet your absence has become a presence. It's psychological physics. Energy doesn't disappear. It just changes form. Your silence transforms from retreat into reflection, and they can't stand what it shows them. Because what the mirror exposes is truth, that they never had real control, only your reactions. That their dominance was built on your willingness to respond. That their power ended the moment you stopped dancing to their rhythm. And now, in the quiet they once craved, they start to feel small. They scroll through memories looking for proof they still matter. They craft excuses to break the silence without admitting why. But you don't move. You've already crossed a psychological threshold from reacting to observing. Your silence has become your weapon. Not one that cuts, but one that reveals. And that's what they fear most. Not losing you, but losing their reflection of control. The mirror effect is cruelly elegant. It doesn't punish through words. It punishes through truth. They realize the silence they once used to manipulate now manipulates them. Every moment of stillness echoes like a question they can't answer. For you, this isn't revenge, it's awareness. You finally see that silence doesn't just expose them. It enlightens you. It shows who values peace and who fears it, who loves you and who only loved control. And once you see that, there's no going back. The mirror doesn't lie, it only reflects what was always there. There's a breaking point in every mind, a moment when the illusion of control starts to crumble under the weight of silence. At first, they handled your distance with pride. They told themselves they didn't care, that you'd be back, that you always come back, because you always did. But this time, nothing. No message, no reaction, no trace. And that's when the cracks begin to form. They scroll through their phone late at night, pretending they're not checking. They replay old conversations, pretending they don't miss them. They see your name and feel something twist inside, something between curiosity and regret, the silence. Once their comfort zone starts to feel like exposure, because without your reactions, they're forced to face what they were hiding from all along themselves. The Stoics said, "The obstacle is the way, and your absence becomes that obstacle, the mirror they can't escape." It blocks their ego from hiding behind distractions, forcing every suppressed feeling to rise to the surface. This is the stage where detachment becomes transformation. Your silence is no longer about withholding communication. It's about shifting the psychological balance of the relationship. While they spiral through uncertainty, you start to breathe again. Your nervous system, once addicted to reaction, begins to detox. You notice how much energy you used to pour into keeping them stable while you fell apart. Now that energy flows inward, rebuilding you. Every day you stay quiet. Your composure deepens. Every urge you resist becomes a victory of discipline over impulse. And with that discipline comes something rare, serenity. Meanwhile, on their side, serenity collapses into chaos. The same silence they once used to dominate now turns into their prison. Their confidence, once built on predictability, becomes quicksand. They start to lose their rhythm, their certainty, their script. You can almost feel the shift, not through words, but through energy, the subtle ways they test the water alike on an old post. Hey, how have you been message that appears out of nowhere? It's not sincerity, it's desperation wrapped in nonchalance. They're not reaching out to reconnect, they're reaching out to reclaim control. Because silence stripped them of the role they once held, the one pulling strings while you danced. And now, they don't know who they are without that control. That's the psychological collapse. The moment they realize the person they dismissed has become the one they can't stop thinking about. The one who once chased them now lives rent-free in their mind. The one who once begged for clarity now speaks through absence. They'll never admit it, not openly. They'll act indifferent, maybe even colder than before. But beneath that facade, the storm is raging. Because silence doesn't just echo, it multiplies, and the more they resist facing it, the more it consumes them. For you, the silence has become peace. For them, it's become punishment. But here's the irony. You didn't punish them. They punished themselves by depending on your reaction for their sense of power. You simply removed the supply. That's when obsession is born, not from love, but from the loss of control. And the moment they start to feel that, the game has already flipped. Because while they collapse inward, you've risen into a calm they can't reach. And there's nothing louder than the peace they can no longer disturb. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's the point where you stop bleeding energy into people who never deserved your depth and start channeling it back into yourself where it always belonged. In the beginning, detachment feels like death. The silence aches. The distance feels unnatural. You keep checking your phone, wondering if they'll reach out, if the story is really over. But with time, something shifts. The silence stops feeling empty. It starts feeling clean. What used to be panic becomes peace. What used to be obsession becomes observation. You realize that detachment isn't losing feelings. It's losing the illusion that your worth depends on someone else's reaction. That's not numbness. That's freedom. The Stoics understood this truth better than anyone. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And courage, in this context, means daring to let go, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally care about yourself enough to stop begging for crumbs. This is where your silence evolves into strength. You no longer hold it as a tactic. You embody it as truth. It's no longer "I'll be quiet so they notice me." It becomes "I'm quiet because I'm at peace." That's when people start to feel it even from a distance. The one who once fed off your emotions can sense the difference. Your energy no longer bends toward them. It stands tall, centered, unwavering. They might test you again. Drop a casual text. Post something designed to provoke a reaction. But what they don't understand is that the old version of you, the one who reacted instantly, who over-explained, who sought validation, no longer exists. You've become unreadable, not because you're hiding anything, but because you've become self-contained. They can no longer access you through emotional shortcuts. Your silence is no longer absence. It's presence with boundaries. It's spiritual discipline made visibly. In the quiet, you begin to build again. Your focus returns to your craft, your body, your peace, your growth. You start to see how much beauty and strength were buried under the noise of chasing. Now, with every breath, you reclaim it. And here's the paradox. The more detached you become, the more magnetic you appear, because people are drawn to what they can't control. Your silence becomes gravity, your stillness, a mystery they can't decode. They used to think they had power over you. Now they sense that power flows from you, and that realization terrifies them. But for you, it's serenity. You're no longer waiting for closure. You are the closure. You've mastered what Stoicism calls apatheia, not apathy, but serenity through mastery of emotion. No bitterness, no games, no performance, just calm awareness that you owe your peace to no one. And when you reach that level of detachment, life itself changes rhythm. You attract differently. You choose differently. You move differently. Because you no longer operate from scarcity, but from abundance, the abundance of self-worth, clarity, and quiet confidence. That's the rise of detachment. The moment you stop chasing the noise and become the silence everyone else can't stop hearing. At first, they celebrated your silence. They mistook your withdrawal for weakness, a tantrum, a passing storm, something they could outwait. After all, they'd seen this before: your patience, your hope, your need to fix what they kept breaking. But not this time. Days turn to weeks, and what they once thought was temporary now feels permanent. The silence they expected to control begins to control them. At first, it's subtle, an itch in the back of their mind. They pick up their phone, scroll through old messages, stop themselves, then do it again an hour later. They start checking your profile, wondering what you're doing, who you're with, if you've already forgotten them. That's how obsession begins quietly, beneath the surface of pride. Because the truth is, they were never indifferent. They were addicted to your reaction, to the reassurance that no matter how cold they became, you'd always warm the space between you. Now that warmth is gone, and what's left is silence. Heavy, echoing, unbearable. For someone who used control as comfort, silence is the one thing they can't handle. It exposes what manipulation was designed to hide: insecurity. They start to test the void, a subtle like on an old post. A vague text sent late at night. "Hey, you crossed my mind. Hope you're doing well." But these aren't messages, they're probes. They're not reaching for you. They're reaching for control. They need to know if you'll still respond, if the rhythm can still be restored. And when you don't, when you remain unmoved, something inside them cracks. Because the silence isn't just empty anymore. It's alive. It's heavy with the weight of their own reflection. They begin to feel what they once made you feel: the confusion, the overthinking, the restless need for closure that never comes. Every unanswered message becomes a mirror. Every ignored signal becomes a lesson they never wanted to learn. This is the psychological inversion, the moment when the game flips entirely. The person who fed off your attention now starves for it. The one who once saw you as replaceable now can't replace the feeling of your calm. They'll start to rationalize it. They must be talking to someone else. They're just pretending to be detached. They'll reach out eventually. But deep down, they know. You're gone, not physically, but energetically. You no longer orbit their gravity. They orbit yours. And that's what haunts them. Because silence, when held with discipline, doesn't fade, it grows. It seeps into their mind during quiet moments, in the pauses between distractions, in the nights when their ego can't shield them anymore. They feel it when they laugh with someone new, the hollowness behind it. They feel it when they scroll, the absence of your familiar presence. They feel it when they lie awake, replaying everything they once dismissed. Your silence becomes the sound of consequence, not revenge, not punishment. Just the natural echo of imbalance correcting itself. They gave you crumbs, and now they're starving. You gave your best, and now you're full. Not of them, but of peace. That's when they finally understand you weren't asking for too much. You were simply giving it to the wrong person, and nothing terrifies them more than realizing you're not waiting anymore. They always come back. Not because you cast a spell, not because they suddenly realize your worth, but because silence forces them to face a version of themselves they can't tolerate, the one without your validation. When the ego starves, it sends out search signals. It dresses its hunger as curiosity. "Hey, how have you been? Just wanted to check on you. Been thinking about you lately." They want to see if the door is still open, if they can still reach the person they once had wrapped around their silence. But what they find instead is a different energy. You've changed. Your responses, if you even give them, are calm, short, detached. You're no longer performing emotional CPR for their comfort. You've stopped trying to make them feel safe while you were drowning. They can sense it, even through a single text. They feel that something in you has shifted, something they can't control anymore. It's not that you're being cold. It's that you've become measured. stoic, centered, unavailable to manipulation. This is the return and the test, the moment when your silence starts to draw them in, and their curiosity mutates into obsession. But this isn't the time to react emotionally. This is the time to observe, because their return is not a confession, it's a diagnosis. It reveals how much they depend on the power dynamic you've broken. They're not seeking closure, they're seeking confirmation that they still matter. The weak mind takes the bait. It romanticizes the comeback, paints it as fate, and runs right back into the same cycle. But the disciplined mind, the stoic mind, sees the test clearly. You don't pass the test by rejecting them loudly. You pass it by staying unmoved. When they reappear, don't rush to respond. Let time stretch, because silence, once again, is your shield. If you reply, make it precise. No emotion, no explaining, no catching up. You've already done your explaining in the past, and they ignored it then. Now, you don't explain. You demonstrate. Your silence is the demonstration. It says, I've grown beyond the version of me that needed your validation, and that realization will unsettle them far more than any angry message ever could. Because what they truly fear isn't rejection, it's indifference. They can argue with anger. They can manipulate guilt, but they can't control peace. They'll test you again, maybe by bringing up the past, pretending they've changed, or even using vulnerability as a weapon. I've been thinking about how I treated you. I miss you. But remember this, a person who truly transforms doesn't announce it, they embody it. If you need to hear it to believe it, you're still playing their game. The Stoic doesn't operate on words. He observes patterns. He measures consistency, not confessions. He knows that true power is not in punishing, but in choosing. You choose what energy enters your space. You choose who gets access to your calm. You choose whether the past repeats or dissolves. And most importantly, you choose not to need an ending to find peace. When they realize they can no longer extract emotion from you, no reaction, no chase, no validation, they start to unravel again. Because your silence this time isn't an absence, it's a boundary. It's a wall built not from anger, but from evolution. They'll try to provoke the old you, the reactive one, the emotional one, the one who would do anything to prove their worth. But that version of you died the day you learned to master your silence. Now, they're speaking to your shadow, and the real you is standing behind it, calm, composed, untouchable. This is the quiet revolution. You no longer seek revenge. You radiate clarity. You no longer explain. You embody. You no longer react. You redefine. Their return was never the victory. Your restraint is. Because true Stoic power isn't about proving you've moved on. It's about realizing you no longer have to prove anything at all. And once they feel that the composure, the stillness, the certainty that their chaos can no longer touch you, they finally understand you're not playing the game anymore. You've outgrown it. And nothing drives the manipulator to madness faster than realizing their silence no longer breaks you, it builds you. It doesn't happen all at once. Obsession creeps in quietly disguised as curiosity, as nostalgia. as just wondering how you've been. But beneath those harmless thoughts, something darker stirs. They start to feel the void. Not just notice it, feel it. Every silence from you becomes a question they can't answer. Every moment you don't respond becomes a confrontation with their own irrelevance. They used to think they owned your attention, that no matter what they did, how distant, how dismissive, how cruel, you'd still orbit them. But your silence rewired the gravity. Now they're the ones circling your calm. They scroll through old messages at 2 a.m., chasing the echo of how your presence used to feel. They replay the conversations where you gave too much, where you cared. Explained. Understood. Back then, it was easy for them to dismiss your light because it was always there. Now that it's gone, they realize the truth. You weren't just someone in their life, you were the balance holding it together. Their pride won't let them say that out loud, so they perform indifference. They post pictures, share quotes, even pretend to have moved on. But all of it is noise, desperate attempts to drown out the silence you left behind. Because silence doesn't fade, it echoes. It lives rent-free in their head, looping like a song they can't turn off. They start wondering if you've forgotten them. Then they start wondering why you can. That's when obsession begins. Obsession isn't passion. It's panic disguised as desire. It's the ego realizing that what it once controlled now exists beyond its reach. They thought they could withhold affection as a way to keep power, but now it's your absence that holds the power. The dynamic has inverted completely. They can't stop checking if you've seen their posts. They notice every detail, your silence, your lack of engagement, your indifference, and it eats at them. Their mind becomes a battlefield. Half of it wants to reach out. The other half fears rejection. Half of it says, they'll come back eventually. The other half whispers, what if they never do? You don't see this turmoil, but you feel it. You sense the shift in energy, the way your peace suddenly carries weight. Because silence, when held with mastery, becomes magnetic. You've stopped chasing validation, and that's exactly why they crave yours. You've stopped explaining, and that's why they can't stop questioning. You've stopped needing them, and that's what makes them need you. This is psychological gravity, the point where calm becomes irresistible. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And that's what your silence has become, not vengeance, but evolution. While they spiral, you rise. While they chase noise, you move deeper into stillness. While they try to rebuild your image in their mind, you've already rebuilt yourself in reality. They may not understand it, but they feel it, that something in you is untouchable now. They try to bait you emotionally, to draw you back into the old rhythm. But the silence between you isn't just distance anymore, it's transformation. You've become what they can't. Name peace that doesn't need them. And peace, to someone addicted to control, is terrifying. Because how do you fight someone who no longer reacts? How do you manipulate someone who's mastered themselves? How do you win a game that they stopped playing? They can't. And so obsession deepens. They check your last scene. They hover over the message box. They write and delete, again and again. Their mind creates stories, alternatives, excuses, anything to avoid the truth. You didn't disappear out of spite. You evolved out of necessity. And deep down, they know they didn't lose you because you stopped caring. They lost you because you finally started caring about yourself. That's the moment the obsession begins. Not when you block them, not when you post something they see, but when they realize for the first time that your silence isn't about them anymore. It's about your freedom, your discipline, your peace. And there's no sound more haunting to the manipulative mind than the quiet confidence of someone who's learned to live without them. At some point, the silence stops feeling like a tactic. It becomes your nature. There's no more tension in your chest, no more itch to explain, no more need to prove. You've crossed the invisible threshold from reaction to command, from noise to presence, and the very silence that once felt unbearable has become your equilibrium. The game didn't end when they stopped talking to you. It ended the moment you stopped needing to talk back. They don't understand what happened. They can't, because the power shift wasn't loud, it was subtle, microscopic, internal. It happened the day you stopped reaching for their validation and started anchoring in your own peace. You didn't win through dominance, you won through detachment. That's what the Stoics meant by "he who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior." You've conquered the battlefield that destroyed most people, the war between emotion and control. They'll try to re-enter your life at some point, maybe through a casual "hey," maybe through nostalgia disguised as concern. But when they do, it won't land the same, because you've seen behind the curtain. You've seen how emotional control flips power, and once you've seen that truth, you can't unsee it. Their charm won't hypnotize you anymore. Their distance won't destabilize you anymore. Their silence won't scare you anymore. You've mastered the art of stillness. You've learned that silence doesn't mean loss, it means leverage. Every pause, every unanswered message, every quiet decision, it was building something in you. Discipline, focus, emotional sovereignty. Now, while they're haunted by your absence, you're building your empire of calm. While they replay conversations, you're rewriting your story. While they stalk your silence, you're mastering yourself. This is the final reversal, when their obsession fuels your ascension. They used to measure your worth by how quickly you responded. Now they measure their own worth by the silence that answers back. They thought they could control the rhythm. But the rhythm no longer exists because you stopped playing their song. And here's the truth. Most people never reach. The ultimate power isn't getting them to chase you. It's realizing you no longer need them to. You don't crave their attention. You choose your peace. You don't seek revenge. You live in clarity. You don't beg for closure. You became it. Because closure doesn't come from their apology. It comes from your understanding that silence revealed what words tried to hide. They'll eventually recognize it too, in their own way. Maybe when they try to recreate your presence and fail. Maybe when they meet others, but can't feel the same gravity. Because the truth is, people don't forget the one who stopped reacting. They remember the one who stopped needing. Your detachment became the mirror they can't look away from. It exposes their fragility, their performative confidence, their shallow power, and deep down, they realize you didn't lose them. They lost access to something pure. You were never powerless. You were just distracted by noise. Once you turned inward, you remembered who you are. Still, focused, untouchable. That's the highest Stoic lesson: to stand firm in the chaos, not through resistance, but through self-command. To walk away not with bitterness, but with clarity. To realize that silence, when owned, becomes an empire. Let them wonder. Let them talk. Let them project. Because while they're still reacting, you're living peacefully, powerfully, silently. And that's how the game ends. Not with noise, not with revenge, but with evolution. They tried to break your peace. Instead, they built it. They tried to silence you. Instead, you mastered silence itself. Now, you don't chase closure. You are closure. You don't wait for the power to return. You became the power, because once silence becomes your strength, the game doesn't just flip, it's over. When you finally stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening, you free yourself. When you stop chasing what keeps running, you rise. And when you master silence, truly master it, the entire balance of your life changes. Because silence is not emptiness. It's self-respect made visibly. It's emotional intelligence turned into armor. It's the moment you stop performing for approval and start leading with peace. Remember this: the person who once breadcrumbed you, ignored you, doubted you will never forget your silence. Not because it punished them, but because it exposed them. And long after the noise fades, your stillness will echo in every space they enter. That's what Stoicism looks like in motion. Calm, calculated, unbothered, unshakable. So if this message found you at the right time, don't let it stop here. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below: "My silence speaks louder." Because it's not just a phrase, it's a declaration of power. And if you're walking this Stoic path with me, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep building the kind of peace they can't disrupt. This is Think Stoic 101, where silence isn't weakness. It's your strategy, your discipline, and your revolution.